Now to discuss the implication of the MPC decision on Nigeria's economy, I'm joined now by an investment and financial expert, Dr. Nnaemeka Obiaraeri. With him is a research and insights associate at Norrenberger, Samuel Oyekanmi. It's a pleasure to have you both here, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Now, I'll start with you, Mr. Obiaraeri. So did the CBN's decision to hold MPR and all other parameters align with your expectations?
I wasn't surprised to see that they left the MPR at 27.5%. You know, I was a bit taken aback when I saw the MBS numbers, which tried to show that inflation was receding, which is not the reality on ground based on the numbers that we see in the marketplace. And I also do not blame Olayemi Cardoso for retaining that level. You know, I've always said this. We keep on tackling inflation using monetary policy instruments that accounts for 5% of the problems that we have in Nigeria. 95% of the problems we have in Nigeria has to do with inefficiencies, how to do with incompetencies, how to do with unproductivity, how to do with insecurity attributable to mainly the physical managers of the economy, from the Federal Minister of Finance, Federal Government of Nigeria to the state government to the local governments. And until we do the right thing, when we talk about inflation, we need to understand one particular thing. We're talking about, in a layman balance, when you have few goods being pursued by so much money in circulation, when you have productivity, when supply of any particular goods and services far outstrips demand, prices will naturally come down. What we are suffering in Nigeria has nothing to do with most of the monetary policy interventions that the CBN has been doling out. If those on the physical side of the economy can actually do 20% of what Olayemi Cardoso is doing on the monetary policy side, I tell you, inflation will recede down to single digits. We are not producing, energy security is not assured, insecurity everywhere. Every part of the economy that is supposed to rejig productivity, create employment, boost consumption, that, you know, put more money into the hands of the people and boost the HDIs are not there. And the federal government of Nigeria, the state governors and the local government chairmen, in a majority, are doing nothing to boost productivity that will enhance, you know, economic growth and development, that will enhance price stability, that will ensure employment and other things that will help us to tackle inflation. I give you a typical example, if time permits me. You will see clearly on the agri sector. I give you an example. I'm into palm oil production. I have massive farm gates and processing plants. As at March this year, a 25-liter gallon of palm oil was selling for 35,000. Today it is 65,000. And this is a country that at one time in 1965 controlled 45% of the global palm oil market. What will it take us to cover the domestic supply gap of almost about 1.4 million tons? Nothing. It only requires concerted effort at the local government and state level, working with the private sector. And within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we will have so much surplus of supply that will drive down prices.
Mr. Obiaraeri, here the factors like inefficiency and, of course, insecurity, that doesn't show up on the MPR. And thank you for that detail regarding the price of palm oil there. But, Mr. Oyekanmi, let me come to you. We have proponents on either side of the coin making compelling arguments. But if you could, do tell us, for how much longer can growth continue to be the trade-off?
Of course, no one can say how specific, how long we're going to wait for when the CBN is probably going to change their stance in terms of interest rate movement in order to stimulate economic growth. But just like I would want to reiterate the fact that the market had some form of expectation that we'll be holding rate, especially following inflation data that came up at some point last week. So the headline inflation shows that the headline inflation was slowing, but then when you look at the component likes of food and core inflation increased. Food inflation on a month-on-month basis, also headline inflation also rose. And you look at some other components like month-on-month imported food inflation rose to the highest so far this year. And what that suggests is that there's still some short-term inflationary risk, right? And then when looking at it plainly from the monetary side of things, the only option that you would think that the CBN has is to, again, hold interest rates. I totally expected that interest rates would be held at current levels. Of course, it also has significant impact in terms of economic growth. But when you look at numbers also from the GDP side of things, and these I'm speaking plainly from the numbers point of view and not sentimentally, right? So look at the new GDP data that was released yesterday. The economy is still growing at an average rate of 3.2% to 3.3%, which would suggest to the CBN that the economy is still very much growing. PMI numbers have also been quite moderately good so far this year. And that suggests that despite the fact that the interest rate has been high, money supply is over 110 trillion naira as of May, the economy seems to be robust enough to handle some more of these shocks. So I would expect that up until when we start seeing some level of what I call it now, a trend in terms of inflation downtrend, I mean, the economy up until that point, we'll probably see the CBN holding interest rate at the current levels.
So still on you, Mr. Oyekanmi, while the trade tensions and global risks persist, we also know there are re-inflationary risks from the domestic scene. So which of these do you think is more challenging?
Two sides of the coin. I would think at this point we have a lot of structural issues here, just like the doctor also mentioned around the Nigerian economy. Global risk, when you look at the components of inflation in recent times, you see that we've not had so much impact from, for example, FX. FX has been relatively stable so far this year. But locally here, you have things around transportational issues, structural issues around the supply chain, insecurity in food producing region. At some point 2 months ago, we saw food inflation rose to about 50% in Benue State and some other food producing region in Nigeria. And that just tells you that there are some huge structural issues happening when it comes to food. And irrespective of the rebasing, food still accounts for about 45 to 47% of household expenditure in Nigeria and gives you an indication of how a slight increase in prices of food in Nigeria is going to impact the purchasing power of average Nigerians. And then again, if we are going to find ourselves surviving inflation, or if we really want to combat inflation significantly away from just the monetary policy stance, we need to start addressing some of the structural factors impacting inflation from a supply side. We want to be able to improve supply so that we can drive prices down, and that comes from issues of security across different regions, especially food producing regions, and transportation. How easy is it to move food, produced food from the north producing region to other consuming regions in the country? How easy can you do that? Is in terms of infrastructure, road, rail, or even in terms of storage facilities. We don't have those in place. And however you look at it, by the time you look at the value chain, you understand that these systemic issues also impact the final consuming price at the end of the day, and eventually also prints on headline inflation.
Mr. Obiaraeri is still with us, and I wanted to know from you, sir, how will the retained monetary policy rate impact investor confidence in the Nigerian economy, particularly in terms of foreign direct investment and also portfolio flows?
Basically what it will do, and we exactly know what Olayemi Cardoso is doing, it will only attract mostly foreign portfolio investors. Basically what Yemi has done over the last 6 months to 1 year is to ensure forex stability. And the only way you can ensure forex stability is to play with this monetary policy rates, because there are two major sources of inflows. Either we are exporting and generating dollar, or we are raising NPR to such a rate that foreign portfolio investors can come into, in fact, I call it FX Ponzi scheme. Let me explain to you what I mean by FX Ponzi scheme, roll in, roll out. As long as we are able to service the FPIs, pay them their quarterly, monthly interest rates, pay them their principal when they demand for it. One set rolls in, after 1 year, another set rolls in. Price stability, because we produce only the crude oil. We export nothing in terms of non-oil export. So as long as foreign exchange stability is there, it will even help investors to plan. The truth was, even before Nnaemeka became CBN governor, we realized clearly it was very easy for Jonathan's government, or even the government before Jonathan, to be able to manage forex and price stability, because we had this central this NNPC paying an average of about $3.5 billion into the inflation account every month. But under Buhari, for the 8 years Buhari was president, even now, the NNPC barely remits up to $1 billion, and the paucity of the dollar inflow is affecting a lot of things. The same thing with foreign direct remittances. Under Jonathan, we're having a foreign diaspora remittances of average of $22 billion. Today, I don't even think it's up to $10 billion. So it's a major problem. What Yemi is trying to do is to, as much as possible, allow the hot monies to come in, continue to flow in order to maintain FX and price stability, hoping and borrowing time to see if those on the physical side can tackle insecurity, which will enable us to ramp up non-oil exports, especially in terms of food and processed food commodities for export, and also to enable those on the physical side to fix some of the structural deformities in Nigeria that can help us to enhance productivity. Overall, if you don't tackle insecurity, investors cannot come in. We still on the agri sector. Gino, at a time in Nigeria, had a very robust plan to invest over $200 billion into the tomato value chain. But the insecurity that happened in Kebbi State, when they nearly lost some of their expatriate staff to bandit attack, made them to roll back on most of their plans. If we tackle insecurity, 50% of the problems we have in Nigeria will be tackled. But up till now, despite the fact that outside the budgetary allocations and the alleged 100 billion naira that they deduct from the inflation account every month for the security, yet we are seeing nothing. We've suggested to them many ways we can actually rejig and restore the security architecture of Nigeria in order to hand over security back to the communities, just as we had it in the early 60s, to enable us to slay this insecurity once and for all. But for whatever reason, based new to the federal government and state governors, they seem to continue garbaging in the old things they've been doing that have not been working, that have made us to waste over $27 billion on security expenses under Buhari and have still achieved nothing.
Mr. Obiaraeri, I'm going to come back to you on this issue of tackling a food disruption, a food supply disruption. But Mr. Oyekanmi, first off, the CBN governor said the committee will continue to maintain its stance until risk to inflation recedes sufficiently. How soon do you see this happening, and what more needs to be done to hasten it up?
Just like the doctor also said that we need some form of synergism, right, between the monetary and fiscal side. And I think also from the fiscal side, there's really the importance of private and public partnership, right? While the government is doing its own bit to incentivize business activities in the country, we also need private sector to also come in and play, right? Before you can fight inflation, and we need to look at it from the food side, because there seems to be a whole lot of problem around food inflation. There is need for government to create an enabling environment for private capital to come into the sector to drive and improve supply. That way we can drive down prices. If we don't see that happening, the chances are we'll continue to deal with high food inflation, which at the end of the day also impacts the headline at the end of the day. So if we can achieve that, well, we could say in the short to medium term, we could achieve relative stability in terms of prices. And as a result, the CBN would also follow through in their orthodox approach. But what we are saying right now is that we are relying on the impact of the rebasing of the CPI and then favorable base effect. So don't forget, last year we were seeing significant high inflation numbers. So the fact that we are in a new year and based on the fact that we have very high bases, the chances that inflation would slow might be slowly. And that is not sustainable. We really need to start seeing inflation taper across the curve rather than look at food is high today. Look at core items, it's low tomorrow. There seems to be not a stable outlook or trend in terms of inflationary pressure. So when we can achieve that, and that comes from that's a function of managing FX stability, which we seem to have seen some improvement in recent times. And then the other part is also to tackle the factors that is contributing to high food prices. And just like Dr. also said, and I'm reiterating, insecurity is one of those. If you can tackle security, that's going to improve supply. And also create an enabling business environment that helps to attract private capital across the value chain, the agricultural value chain. If we're able to do that also, I expect, again, that the market, that prices would taper, and then we'll be able to start seeing the CBN also move in line towards that direction of interest rate cut.
Obiaraeri, I do beg that you make this summary because we're almost out of time, but I have to ask, can monetary policy alone effectively address the current economic challenges, or do you think there's more coordination that needs to be applied?
I mentioned to you earlier on, there is nothing that Olayemi Cardoso can do tackling with the monetary policy instruments within his control to tackle the economic and structural reforms in the economy. I give you a typical example. You discover recently that the price of rice came down slightly, and they were all rejoicing. What happened? We have a country with a population and land mass that today, if we want to, we consume our annual rice consumption about 7.5 million tons of processed rice. If we decide today that we want to produce 36 million tons of rice, we can easily produce this country within 1 year. We have the programs lined up and how it can be done. Rather than the federal government of Nigeria and the state governors working at a program that will help us to ramp up massive rice production in order to even allow us to export nothing less than $10 billion worth of rice. What did they do? They opened up the floodgates, issued licenses, import permit to some of their cronies, flooded the market with cheap rice from India that landed here at a cost of 45,000 naira per 50 kg bag. And everybody's clapping. They forgot that they've practically destroyed 3 things. They've destroyed the local economy, destroyed local farmers, destroyed the local processing plant, and then destroyed our foreign exchange net reserves. But we know it's not Olayemi Cardoso's fault. These are people who are very short-termic in nature. They just want to do kumbaya. What they would have done was very simple. Aggregate over 2 million hectares of land, which we can easily get out of 64 million hectares of land. Put them in clusters under a private-public partnership arrangement. Get the farmers, set up a processing a commodity board that can buy up everything.
Apologies, Dr. Obiaraeri. We only had a short period of time for this conversation, and we have run out, so my apologies, but we do have to close the curtain on this conversation. But thank you very much, Dr. Obiaraeri and Mr. Oyekanmi, for joining us on this conversation. Thank you.